Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar today, Analytics and Agility, Reinventing FP&A for the New Business Landscape. My name is Michael Daney and I'm a partner at Sense Corp, where I lead our business transformation practice. I'm based out of Austin and I've been here about 9 years. And I'm really happy to be with you today to talk about transformation within the finance function and within FP&A specifically. Just as a little bit of background about Sense Corp, we are a leading consultancy focused on transforming organizations and government agencies for the digital era. And we specialize in helping our clients design and successfully navigate their transformation journeys, whether that's implementing modern applications or shifting to the cloud, or re-engineering and optimizing functions within their business. And today we're going to be talking about a specific function, which is financial planning and analysis. This is a particularly exciting topic for me because I've spent a lot of my career helping finance organizations optimize their people, process, and technology. And so it's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. We're going to talk today about how FP&A is entering something of a golden age. In these times of increased volatility and change in the market, increasing customer demands and new and innovative technologies, FP&A is uniquely positioned within the business to really play a strategic and critical role for the growth of the business and driving more of an innovative mindset. So why is that? I think there's kind of a confluence of factors, some more technology focused and some more business focused, that are all kind of swirling together right now to make this a really unique time to work in the FP&A space. So if you think about things like the broader digital disruption in the market, the rise of advanced analytics and artificial intelligence, and really just this overarching pressure to more effectively monetize all the data that our organizations have, you think about those as kind of technology or data drivers, and then you mix that with this increased emphasis for FP&A as a business advisor, kind of that strategic advisor role, certainly more competition and changing customer expectations. All of those things are making it a challenging time and an interesting time to run any business. And FP&A is often where executives turn when they're looking for that strategic advisor to help them chart their course into the future. And so the challenge now for those of us leading FP&A functions is, how do we reposition and strengthen our team to meet the moment? I think one way to think about it is, in the old days, FP&A often was kind of the value tracker, perhaps the value forecaster, right? Often owning that forecasting into the future. But now FP&A is not just being asked, what do we think next quarter or next year might look like? And the FP&A teams we're working with are being asked to really be a catalyst for growth and a strategist for that innovation and value creation. So rather than being an observer on the side, kind of calling the balls and strikes, really more so helping to influence what future performance might look like. One easy way to think about this is the kind of classic finance pyramid. This view was popularized by KPMG a number of years ago. And it really boils down to saying, within most finance teams, the base, we spend a lot of time on financial operations or kind of transactional accounting activities. And as you shift up the pyramid, you start getting into the more strategic capabilities where you're really being a more active advisor to the executive team as they chart the course. As we look at FP&A teams across industries, we're kind of seeing that pyramid flip now, where FP&A functions are being asked to spend more time and energy and focus on that strategic element, that business performance, risk management aspect, and spend much less time on the more transactional activities. This fits in nicely with what we're seeing from a technology perspective, because we're able to automate so much more of the stuff at the base which is enabling us to spend more time on strategic activities. And so, if you look at the research, organizations that have high performing finance teams, um, they have 40-50% more of their staff in full-time business insight roles. They're really flipping the pyramid. And so for those of us leading finance teams, the natural question is, okay, this all sounds great. How do I do it? How do I successfully navigate this shift? And at Sense Corp, as we've helped a number of organizations optimize and modernize their FP&A functions, we think it really comes down to kind of a three-legged stool around strategy, business insights, and the data capability. And I will suggest to you today that a next generation FP&A function really requires a very disciplined focus on that strategic advisory component, on insight generation, right? So taking that data and turning them into insights, and then value creation. So really looking ahead to the future where FP&A moves from something more of an occasional course corrector at times and a forecaster to really a more active participant in the strategic direction of the business, and really the tip of the spear as it relates to the business leveraging their data to drive optimal outcomes. So I'm going to summarize our findings and recommendations around transforming FP&A into 5 big considerations. I'll have a section on each of these focused on, do you have the right charter and approach? Do you understand your market drivers intimately? Do you have the right tools and technologies? Do you have the right clean data? Can you trust the data that you're putting into your models to run your business? And lastly, arguably most importantly, do you have the right talent? Do you have the right operating model and the right folks on your team to position your FP&A function to really play a strategic role in the future of your business? So I'll talk through each of these. I'll weave in some examples and case studies from some of our clients. And I'm going to use one organization in particular throughout this discussion because I think they're a great backdrop for this discussion on FP&A transformation. And that company is Uber. So you might be going, that's a bit of a curveball, Michael. Why Uber? Well, Uber is a really fascinating business to start with, but they're a perfect case study for any conversation on FP&A transformation for a few reasons. Namely, Uber's business is incredibly complicated, it's dynamic, and it's constantly changing. So all of those things are perfect elements for kind of a messy, difficult FP&A challenge. And Uber's done a lot of impressive things to solve that in their unique instance. It's also helpful to think about the fact that they've got 600 plus unique markets around the world. They're a big operation. They've got constantly changing supply and demand pictures due to their model. Every minute of the day, the number of drivers they have in any given market is fluctuating, and certainly the demand is changing as well. And it's no secret that Uber has a great track record of maximizing the value of their data to optimize their business. And so all of those are great reasons to look at Uber. Beyond that, Uber actually shares a lot of their information publicly about what they're doing with technology to run their business more effectively. So if you look at engineering.uber.com, there's great blog posts and videos about some of the cool things they're doing within the business, including some of the things they're doing with finance analytics. And so I found some really interesting information there that I thought I'd share that I think really illustrates what we're talking about today with reinventing the FP&A function. So with that backdrop, let's shift into the first topic, which is refreshing your charter and approach to really meet the moment with the new demands placed upon FP&A. So a natural starting point is, okay, Michael, you said you want to talk about Uber. Why? What makes Uber's FP&A function so special? Well, spoiler alert, Uber doesn't even have a team called FP&A. They have a team called strategic finance. Now, some of this is semantics, but it is really important. Although FP&A historically has lived within the finance function for obvious reasons, many leading organizations are trying to de-emphasize the finance and accounting aspects of FP&A and and add an extra emphasis on the strategic and analytical aspects of FP&A. So for Uber, they took a hard look at what they wanted out of this team, and they identified that they didn't just want a team that was owning forecasting. They wanted an active strategic advisor that was helping influence future performance. They wanted a team that was helping them turn data into strategy in real time. So this is a key nuance as we think about what's changed for FP&A. Historically, FP&A's influence might have been at a weekly, monthly, quarterly cadence. Now, many of our businesses, like Uber, are demanding that our FP&A team be more active and quick to make judgments and decisions that help influence and optimize business performance. So it goes back to my previous comment of shifting from being an occasional course corrector to really being an active advisor in the strategy and operations of the business. It's not just about charter though, it's also about your approach and your processes. And while there are a lot of moving parts here, the one most obvious thing that we're seeing across industries is this shift from more of an annual operating plan, perhaps a quarterly forecast, shifting that to more of an agile, continuous planning or rolling forecast type model. We're also seeing a change in the way FP&A engages with stakeholders. So rather than it being a finance-centric process as it used to be, it's really much more cross-functional in nature now, where FP&A is still flying the plane, so to say, but really relying heavily on business partners throughout the organization to build a forecast that is very accurate and really resembles the reality on the ground of our operations. It also ties into that old models used to be a little bit more function specific, where you would have an FP&A team member assigned to each business function. Now we're seeing much more of a market-oriented approach, which is really doubling down on that cross-functional nature of kind of a next-gen FP&A capability. So let's go in a little more depth on that idea of a rolling forecast. Uber, they really rebuilt their entire forecasting process and their tech stack from the ground up when their leadership realized the old approach wasn't working. Today, they have a rolling forecasting model that's able to scale on time, on location, and enable shared models across processes. So that means they're really enabling kind of on-demand strategic planning for their business partners, as opposed to a rigid annual or quarterly schedule. Now, if a leader in a certain market, a city operator, someone plugged into the business, if they see an assumption changing in real time, they have access to go input that data into the model and ensure that it is reflected in the overarching output in minutes and hours as opposed to weeks and months. When I say scale on location, that means they're able to have really effortless collaboration across the corporate finance team, market finance leaders, city operators, marketing managers. Everyone's able to have a hand in the process in a way that's intuitive and really drives effective collaboration. And then they've infused data science models throughout their FP&A modeling processes. And they've been really smart about how they did that from a technology perspective. I'll talk more about that here in a bit, but that's enabled them to have kind of unified data science support for strategic planning, where they've got one source of truth for their different models. And it really enables great efficiency and accuracy in the way they're forecasting. So now at any given time, Uber's executives can see an up-to-date view of the rolling forecast versus having to go make a request to FP&A for the latest cut of the quarterly plan or the annual operating plan, whatever the case may be. So it goes without saying that Uber is a tech company. They're new and innovative in a lot of different ways. But the lesson here is absolutely relevant for all of us, regardless of what industry we work in, because Uber's found a way to scale and speed up their forecasting process in a way that's giving their leaders much better insights into the future and enabling them to make smarter business decisions on any given day. Now, if you're going to increase the focus on your forecasting, if you're going to move to more of a rolling forecast, and if you're seeking more of that advisor role from your organization, it's really important that you have the right drivers in your model. You need to understand exactly what's moving supply and demand and pricing and the various components that play into an effective forecast. So you really have to understand those things intimately. In Uber's case, they have a uniquely challenging situation, which is their surge pricing model. So I'm sure you're familiar when you're leaving a concert or a sporting event or whatever the case may be. Oftentimes the demand for Ubers is significantly up, and they immediately raise their prices. They surge their prices to meet that demand. It's interesting from just a pricing perspective and a basic economics viewpoint, but it also leads to some nuance and challenges for their FP&A function, because dynamic pricing therefore means dynamic forecasting. So understanding the drivers behind pricing and what will encourage a customer to pay the higher price or to wait till demand drops down or find another option, that's really important for Uber's strategic finance team. What will make a customer pay 200% surge versus not? So Uber's done a ton of research on this, and they've really mined the data to understand what drives customer behaviors in different markets as it relates to surge pricing. And they found something really interesting. This was actually featured in a Forbes article a few years ago. Uber looks at some things you would expect. They look at location, time of day, traffic patterns, weather, perhaps your rider history. They're looking at all those data points to determine how they surge pricing. But this Forbes article calls out that they also look at your phone's battery percentage, because their models have shown that when your phone is dying, you're much more likely to pay the upcharge, pay the surge pricing, so you can get home. It's very logical, but think about how nuanced that is, that in their pricing model, and as a result in their forecasting model, they have to include an assumption about each individual rider's phone battery percentage. Now, the point here is that for those of us working in oil field services or healthcare or retail or telecom or whatever the case may be, we don't care about our customers' phone battery percentage. That's totally irrelevant. But what is our version of that? What is our unique hidden driver that should be in our forecast? It should be in our model as an assumption, but it's not. We can take a page out of Uber's playbook in seeking to understand what some of those key market drivers are and ensuring that we're reflecting them in our forecast in a way that really makes our models extremely responsive to changing customer and market dynamics. A great example of this is one of our clients in the telecom space. They have a subscription-based model with their customers, and so understanding which customers might churn or might choose to disconnect their services is really critical for them to be able to forecast their revenue and profitability for the coming quarters and year. And so we helped them do some deep dive analysis on what some of the drivers were for customer churn. And we helped them identify some very granular, nuanced examples, similar to the phone battery percentage example, but maybe a little bit less Big Brother-like in nature. We helped them identify those and incorporate them into not only their financial models, but also into their operational cadence and their technology. So when we identified something that increased the likelihood of a customer churning, we passed that through into the model for the go forward forecast, but we also use that to trigger certain promo offers to determine which call center agent that customer might get routed to ensure a field service technician was equipped with that knowledge so that they could provide white glove service to the customer. All of those things ensured that we not only had a great forecast, but that we understood the customer and we were leveraging that information to course correct in real time. So again, the FP&A functions of old might have identified that, they might have put in the forecast, but would they have influenced intraday different operational activities designed to save that customer? So rather than just forecast the future, really influencing better outcomes for the business. And that's at the heart of what we're talking about here as we think about reinventing the FP&A function. Now, if you're gonna take a new charter and vision, you're gonna take on more responsibility as an FP&A function, if you're gonna understand your drivers really effectively, you also need to make sure you have the right tools. And in many cases, our finance functions are not equipped with the right tools for this new environment. Put another way, the finance tech stack you have now may not cut it for the future. So what we see with our clients often is they likely have an ERP as the backbone of their business. Many of them also have an enterprise performance management tool like an Oracle Hyperion or an IBM Planning Analytics that sources data from that ERP and enables them to do more forecasting, business scenario planning, that kind of deal. And then every client organization I've seen uses the holy grail of finance technologies, which is Excel. So some combination of these tools are usually what's supporting the FP&A function as they work to track business performance and forecast the future. None of these are going away, right? All of these will continue to be critical components in the broader finance tech stack. But if we're trying to influence more outcomes in real time, if we're trying to be a more strategic partner to our executives, if we're trying to weave in more big data and data science capabilities, we're going to need a next-gen tool stack. And there's lots of different ways to look at this, but I think in simplest terms, you can kind of think about it in layers and thinking about, do I have the right technologies to check the box in each of these layers for kind of a next-gen FP&A tech stack? That's all the way from sourcing data out of your systems, streaming it and computing it to get it into a usable format, certainly integrating it into your data science models and building different models using kind of a data science workbench capability, and then enabling those user inputs for the different assumptions that might change in a model. And lastly, putting it into a forecasting and decisioning visualization that FP&A professionals and executives can use to make decisions. Historically, our FP&A teams maybe had access to this top layer, right? Often IT was doing all the data sourcing, perhaps pulling data from the ERP into an EPM tool or a massive Excel model, and then spitting it out for our finance team to do those forecasting processes and manage some of the decisioning. In many cases, FP&A teams have had to get all that data themselves, wrangle it, cleanse it, but the focus is really on that forecasting and decisioning layer. I would argue now that anyone leading an FP&A team, and really even the CFO, should be asking questions about all 5 of these buckets. Now, to be clear, I'm not suggesting that every FP&A team needs to have a big data specialist and a data engineer who's streaming data from different systems in real time. I am saying you need to be asking the tough questions about what capabilities you have within your IT footprint to ensure that you have the right foundation to support your new vision and processes within FP&A. And I put 3 stars on those top 3, which is to say it's those in particular where I would suggest most modern FP&A teams really need to be owning, if not significantly influencing, both the architecture, the resourcing, the team structure designed to support those things, to make sure you've got the right data science capabilities to support your modeling, that you're enabling the right user inputs and user experience to drive a really effective forecasting process. If we go back to our kind of anchor case study here, Uber, they've done exactly this. I added some color coding here so you can see they've built out a decisioning layer. They've kind of merged user input and data science together into that scenario management and compute layer there in green. And then they've got the streaming and the sourcing layers down below. The interesting thing here is Uber actually built their architecture from scratch. They realized that off-the-shelf ERP and EPM tools were not quite getting the job done, and so they built their own system. Most of us don't need to do that. Most of us can leverage off-the-shelf tools, perhaps with some custom data architecture, to enable the right capabilities for our FP&A team to develop those kind of new best-in-class models, weaving in data science, all those good things. It really enables our FP&A teams to kind of spearhead any strategic decisioning effort within the business. The last thing that's really important here is it's not just about getting new technologies for the sake of getting new technologies. And in some cases, it's not even about new functional capabilities. A lot of this boils down to the need for speed. So for many of us, we have legacy data warehouses supporting our FP&A work. Those data warehouses may not refresh more often than every evening or perhaps twice a day. In this new world where FP&A is a more influential, active player in the strategy and operations of the business, we need that data feeding our models in minutes and hours, not days and weeks. That requires a different data sourcing strategy, a different streaming and computation layer to serve that data up at the right time, at the right place, to the right person to support a next-gen FP&A stack. And I think a great place to look at that is actually one of our clients in the oil field services industry. They already are implementing cloud ERP, a best-in-class cloud EPM tool, but they recognized that for their FP&A function to really have the latest, greatest, best insights to influence and forecast the future of the business, they needed to pull operational data in from their assets across the country, and they needed to do that in near real time. And so we've helped them stand up a big data platform to pull that data back, clean it up, feed it back into the FP&A models, and enable them again to make really smart business decisions because they're leveraging that gold mine of data to understand the nuances within their operations and therefore make those targeted changes in their model that are so important. So if you've got the right tools and you've got a rolling forecast and you've got this new positioning as a strategic advisor within the business, it is critical that you have good, clean data feeding your models. As the old saying goes, garbage in, garbage out. And that is absolutely true in the FP&A space. So at Sense Corp, we like to say data quality is king. And it's often helpful to think about it as, are you building your house on a solid foundation? If you've got gaps in process alignment, if you don't have data governance, you've got incomplete or dirty data, that's going to lead not just to inefficiency and not just to frustration, that could lead directly to bad business decisions. If you're using all that data to influence your operations, to determine your business strategy, to advise you on M&A activity or other potential entry into new adjacent markets, you've got to have good data you can trust. And beyond that, what we're seeing with a lot of our clients is that as we elevate the role of FP&A, CEOs and CFOs are asking those FP&A professionals more granular, more nuanced questions about the data. So rather than being satisfied with a macro view of operations or a macro view of next quarter's performance, we're seeing many more questions about kind of stratifications within the data or certain markets or certain product lines. When you go to that level of detail, you're going to see your data quality problems. Those things are not masked as much as they are in aggregate. And so to ensure you're giving the right answers and the right guidance and advice, you've got to be making those investments in data governance, in master data management, in data quality tracking and optimization. All those things are critically important. And I think a good example is vaccine distribution right now, right? As the country works to get the vaccine out as quickly as possible, no one really cares at an operational level about the macro view of how many vaccines got out in a single day. If you're running that operation, what you care about is where there's bottlenecks. You care about which vaccine is stuck in a storage facility. You care about which vaccines are sitting on an 18-wheeler that can't get to their destination because of a winter storm. So you're asking those very granular questions about the supply and where it's tracking through your logistics network much more often than you're just asking the macro question of how many doses did we get out today. That's absolutely true in all of our businesses as well, that we're going to be asking those more targeted questions. And so we need good, clean data supporting our answers. In Uber's case, getting back to our kind of overarching case study, they actually built their own data quality anomaly system to kind of detect anomalies within their data. Because they're collecting so many data points throughout the day, they can't afford to just have humans looking at the data trying to find problems. So they built a series of AI algorithms that go and look at the data all day and they identify anomalies and then report those back to the relevant parties to ensure that those data quality issues get resolved. The point here is we don't all need to go build proprietary data quality trackers and anomaly detection systems, but we do need to ask, what is the right sized version of that for my business? What do I need to be doing to identify where there's data quality issues and to effectively address them before they get into my models? One thing every FP&A leader I've ever talked to says is, if there's bad data anywhere in the business, it will find its way to FP&A. FP&A for many businesses is kind of the last stop in that data lineage. And so the more we can invest in identifying problems and solving them as it relates to data quality earlier in the process, the better off our FP&A teams and our FP&A capabilities will be. I'd like to highlight one of our customers here that's doing this really well. They're in the building materials, manufacturing, and distribution space. And they recognized that as they battled a more complex marketplace with different customer demands, increased competition, the rise of a digital or e-commerce channel, it made forecasting that much more difficult. And it made the importance of good, high quality data even more paramount than it was before. And so they have great, really forward-thinking leaders who saw this coming and have worked with Sense Corp to invest in great data governance processes, to build out a master data management platform that is ensuring high quality certified data across the business. And it's really helping them raise the water levels of data literacy and data-driven decision-making. So I think they're a great blueprint for how to do this well in a way that not only helps FP&A grow and optimize, but also helps the broader business adapt to more of a data-driven decision-making framework. So lastly, if you're going to implement new models and technologies and elevate your role in the business, you've got to have the right people on the bus and in the right seats. And so I think it's a perfect topic to close on, which is building a next gen team for your next gen FP&A function. It's important to think about, what does that mean? It's not just about hiring the right people. It's also around defining the right future state operating model, upskilling capabilities within your team right now, and then, of course, rethinking your talent acquisition and retention priorities. It boils down in many ways to a different operating model, a different team structure. As you meet changing demands, as you incorporate more advanced technology and data analytics into your FP&A function, you probably need to rethink the way your team is structured to set it up for optimal success and for increased collaboration with other parts of the business. As you think about upskilling your current talent and even acquiring new team members, it's likely that you're going to be looking for different skills than you have in the past. So in the past, many of us working in the finance function, as we interviewed candidates, we looked at technical accounting and finance skills, analytical thinking, and of course, just the soft skills around teamwork and collaboration. In this new world, we also are going to be asking a lot about exposure to data analytics. Have you worked with data science models before? In fact, have you collaborated with data scientists? Have you worked in an innovative project setting? What do you know about process improvement and process automation? These new skills are going to increase in their level of importance as the role of FP&A shifts and as we embrace more advanced technologies and more agile processes and ways of doing things. If you think about what that means from a team structure and roles perspective, I would argue that as you grow and modernize your FP&A team, you're not just going to be looking for business analysts, finance professionals, FP&A leads, or forecasting specialists. You very well might be hiring a data scientist onto your FP&A team. You might be building up your core of data analysts within the finance function, or investing in data quality specialists and data governance leads. All of those supplemental skills that are really becoming core to the FP&A team value proposition now. And if you're sitting there going, man, I think I'm picking up what you're putting down, but do I really need to hire data scientists into the finance function? The answer is maybe. In many organizations, certainly smaller and mid-sized organizations, that data science capability may make sense as kind of a shared center of excellence, supporting different parts of the business, including FP&A. But if you're a larger organization, or if you're an organization that's really leaning into this concept of FP&A as a strategic, real-time influencer of future performance, you absolutely should consider standing up data science capabilities within your finance team. And if you don't believe me, go look at Uber's job postings. At least when we recorded this webinar, I went out there and looked, and the first job that popped up was a senior data scientist role within their strategic finance function. So I think that hammers home the point that to do this really well, you may have to make new investments within your finance team, new technologies, new investments in data governance and data quality, and yes, new investments in a different type of skill set, in different talent that you might need to really move the needle as it relates to your FP&A transformation. And I would pose one question to you. If you're still skeptical, I want you to think about a world 12 or 18 months from now where you have reinvented and transformed your FP&A function. You are not only the CFO, but also the CEO's go-to advisor. When he or she has a big question about acquiring a different business, moving into a new market, expanding the customer base, they're coming to you. Do you want to be in that position where they come and ask you an urgent question on business strategy, and your answer has to be, let me go log this with the IT group and get it in their ticketing queue to see if I can get some data science support? I think the answer is no. So if you want to lean into this mindset of FP&A being a strategic advisor for the future, you will have to make some investments to build up that muscle and capability within your team, and to really position yourself and your team to effectively play the role of a next-gen FP&A function. So I know I covered a lot of content. I hope this was helpful as you think about modernizing your FP&A team, and potentially even aligning on a new vision or charter to provide more of a strategic finance mindset, a more analytics-driven mindset. I hope that as you think about understanding your market, using the right tools and technologies and data, and acquiring the right talent, this is a helpful guide for you going forward. But I hope this is also just the start of the conversation, right? A webinar is usually something to get your creative juices flowing a little bit about what the future could be, but actually executing can be very difficult. That's what we do for a living. I would love to engage with you and talk more about your specific journey, whether it's within the FP&A space specifically or more broadly in your organization. Please don't hesitate to reach out. My contact information is here on the screen. I'd love to connect with you directly, or you can always visit our website at sensecorp.com. Thank you so much for your time.